I'm back again. Today we're going to focus on sign up and login pages, where with just 2 component variants, you'll be able to create UIs that look like this, and so many more. Let's rock and roll. By the way, we just had a huge update to our design system that includes dashboard templates, pricing and plan selection templates, settings, FAQs, and even data index pages as well that work across light mode and dark mode. It's a really great update. Lots of great templates available. I'll put a link for that in the description. Okay, so let's get started building out our sign up form. And these forms that we're going to be building here, they're going to go inside of our UIs. And I always like to build the forms a little bit separate because it allows us some flexibility in terms of spinning up a whole bunch of other options. You're going to see what I mean a little bit later on. So let's go ahead, hide the hint copy and hide the icon right. And again, all the components that I'm using here, you should already have in your design system if you already have one. And I'll put a link for ours down below if you're interested. So let's change this first form here to something like email, and then this one to something like our password. Let's also then go in and pull in our checkbox label. There we go. Let's set the size here to our medium and also adjust the subtext as well, or hide the subtext, excuse me. And now let's adjust the subtext to like, I agree to the terms and conditions. Sweet. Let's now go and pull in a button. And what's great about this approach is like you can edit this form to fit whatever use case that you'd like. And let's extend this out and then also just change the label here to something like sign up. There we go. And let's now group these together and set that to maybe like 18. And now add another layer for our button. Set this to something like maybe like 24. I think that's not so bad. Okay, so now let's go and pull in an HR. And what an HR keyline is, it's not a component that people tend to see often. But what it is, just a small, almost think of it like a spacer, but it's just like a 1 pixel line in between. And let's bring down our button, and we're going to set the button here to our subtle and then our secondary. And that's going to give us sort of that white, clean looking button, and then add back in an icon left and swap this for something like our Google. So sign up with Google. There we go. So you can see that our form's coming together pretty well. Let's now group these in a layout and set this to hug. So everything's nice and snug. That's set to fill. This should be set to fill. These should be set to fill, which they are. Fill. And let me just confirm here, fill. Okay, so now that we have our form coming together nicely, let's add some text. Let me move my video bar out of the way. And now let's add some text here. So it's like sign up, like join for free. I don't know, just standard text that you might see on some type of sign up page. We're going to set this to our H6 medium. And this is going to be our headings. There we go. And let's now bring down some text. Maybe we'll swap this to our body large. Let's get designing or something like that. I don't know. Let's add an auto layout here. And again, I'm going to use the Figma's AI in order to, what's the word I'm looking for? Change the name of the layers a little bit later on. And let's set this to something like 12. And now let's group this in an auto layout and then set this here to fill. And we'll set the gap here to something like 36. Keep things nice and snug. Maybe I want this to be a little bit bigger. Maybe I'll try an H5. I'm really just experimenting here. I think it's too big. We'll keep it as is for now. We can always come back and change it a little bit later on. Now, let's add some padding, so like 36 by 36. Oops, and our button down here. And there's our HR, actually. These should be set to fill. Excuse me. There we go. Crisis averted. And now, one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component of this. Oops. Create the component and just call this sign up. There we go. Now I'm going to bring out another copy of this form, okay, an instance of this form. And I'm going to sign up form. And now I'm just going to create the component of this. And you're going to see why I'm doing that. Just call this our sign up. Item, I guess we can call it, I don't know, something to show that this is sort of like, this will be an unpublished component. Now let's go ahead and add a variant here. And these are going to be the forms that are actually consumed. So with this variant, we're going to make this more of like a card style. So we're going to add in a fill. Let's get rid of that. And then let's add in, sorry, I should do that in the main component. Doesn't look like there's one there. I'm not too sure what happened, but let's add in this fill. And this is going to be our surface defaults. And let's add in a stroke, which is going to be our, let's go with our default subtle and set the radius to something like a 12. Okay, so what we're essentially doing is creating two different variants of our sign up form for different use cases. So if this is a default, this is sitting on like a white background, or if this is sitting on an image, you're going to want a card in behind it. So this is going to be our card type. Now, the reason why I didn't just skip right to this right away and create a variant on this component is you're going to want some consistency in your sign up. So say in the future, you want like a password confirmation. What that does, you can add it to the main component and it's going to adjust all the variants of the sign up without having to, instead of having to go copy the same password field across all your different components of your sign up. Okay. So that's how I structure my sign up forms. Now that we have that out of the way, let's move on to our login. Okay. So one thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm also going to add in a logo. So let's go into our logo, pull in our logo components. And let's just copy it and then paste it inside our sign up item or whatever we want to call this unpublished component. And let's simply adjust the size to something like 200 now. And we're going to put that over top again. Maybe it's even too large. Maybe go with like 175. I don't know, in case we do want a logo above the sign up, and maybe we don't have sort of that top page heading, we want a logo above the field itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a layer property for the logo that we're just going to say call as logo. And then let's simply go ahead. Let's add some nested instances here for the sign up item. There we go. And now what we can do, oops, sorry, I added the wrong kind of property. Sorry about that. Let's remove that and let's add the appearance. Sorry, thanks for calling me out behind the scenes. That we're just going to call logo. So now on an instance here, if we go ahead and turn back on our nested instances, there we go. Now we have the option to adjust that logo as well. And if we go on to our sign up item, let's turn on the nested instances that we have for all of our components. So if we need to make any modifications, we can do so simply just by clicking on the instance, not having to double click in. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, now let's move on to our login. And when it comes to like your design system overall, you really want to minimize the number of components that you have floating around. Okay, so what we're going to do, instead of these just being unique to our sign up, is we're going to call this our sign up and login item or login item. And what we're going to do is now add a variant here. Okay, so we have our sign up in this case. So we have our type, which in this case is going to be our sign up. And then this here is going to be our login. Okay, so now what we're going to do is simply just adjust things a little bit. So for our login, we're going to remove the checkbox, change the label here to something like log in, and then log in with Google, and then change the text to something like, welcome back. All right, so now we have our login. Then what we can do is simply sign up and log in. Again, I'll come back and change the name of these frames a little bit later on. Is now within one component, we have all our variants for sign up and login. Okay, it keeps things a little bit cleaner that way. So what we can now do is simply swap this out for our login. There we go. And then swap this one out for our login. And what that's going to do is going to just, again, minimize the number of components that we have floating around, also give us options. So if we really like one design, but it has a sign up form, and we want to introduce the login form, all we have to do is just simply swap the variants. Okay. So now we have our type, our default card, and then let's maybe go with our type default card. Maybe we'll just go with a form of variant names. This is going to be our sign up, and then this here is going to be our login. There we go. So now if we bring one of these out, let's look at the power of this, right? So we can swap between, there's something still astray here. So type, this is going to be our default as well. This is going to be our default, and this here is also going to be our card. So now we can swap between our default and our card for our sign up and also our login. Okay, so it just cleans up our design system by sort of embedding components within other components. So now that we have our form out of the way, now let's go ahead and look at some other treatments that are going to go inside of our sign up and login form that are not specific to forms. So we think about like a sign up and login form, like there's not a ton of treatments out there. They're all kind of similar in the grand scheme of things. Where if I bring over one of these fields here, sorry, this is way too big of a frame. Maybe if I actually just place in a frame that's actually a reasonable size, might make a little bit more sense. There we go. So say if you have like your sign up form here, what you always tend to have on one either side is sort of have some type of graphic, right? An image, you know, a phone, a laptop, maybe just a treatment of some sort. You have one on the left, or you can swap it and you have one on, if I extend this out, and you might have one on the left, right? But setting this up here in a way that's scalable and also gives you a ton of different options, it's not as simple as you think. So I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. And creating this kind of treatment for a sign up and login is what we're going to look at next before building out the actual page templates. But I just want to preamble as to what it is that we're building so you have a visual. Okay, so what I'm going to do to start is to go in and pull in our image component. Now, the way I structure my image components is sort of where I can swap between all these different images and different types as well, whether it's people working or they're more portrait style, and just really just numbered them. You can name them different people as well, but it allows me to, for things like sign up and login, easily swap out images, add new images that I think would fit better use cases to the image component, and then bring them in a little bit later. But that's how I structure my image component, because that's going to come in handy a little bit later on. Okay, so say if we take this gentleman right here, and maybe what we're going to do, move my video bar out of the way again, and let's just add in a desktop frame, right? So if we think about it sort of as I showed you here, and sorry, I have scale on, so let's turn that off. So let's just stretch it out a bit. And again, we can come back a little bit later on and adjust some like the widths and stuff. Maybe we'll start off with 1440, maybe like a 10, whatever. So a 1440 is a 720. There we go. So sort of like that halfway point. Okay. So what we're going to do then is we're going to create a component over top of our instance. So let's create, let's create the component. Sorry, I had no idea where I was looking there. So let's create our component. And now we can add variants on top of this component to fit different use cases, okay? So a common use case that I see, we can call this sort of our side module, side module. Again, I'll come back and change the wording later on, is we can add all these different treatments here to reflect different use cases for things like quotes and testimonials, so on and so forth. So a real common one is if you have a gradient over top of this image, and a gradient is going to come in handy here once we add things like testimonials on top of this image. So what I'm going to do is I have that rectangle, I'm just going to paste it over top, and now I'm going to apply a gradient to it. So let's go into our gradients and maybe just look for the ones that have some level of opacity. So like a gradient top. And again, I'm going to be releasing a video on how I set up my gradient, so be sure to subscribe for that. So now we have that little bit of a different treatment, right? So now if I go into our properties, turn on the nested instances for these images, and if I set the opacity or the gradient here and the layers to scale and scale as it is, or actually let's go left and right, top and bottom, excuse me, left and right, top and bottom, and I bring out one of these instances, right? Now all of a sudden I can swap out the image, but the gradient maintains over top of it, right? So that's the beauty of this treatment here. But so now that I have sort of the foundation for sort of that side module of our sign up and login, let's get into some more complex treatments for things like testimonials, so on and so forth. Okay, so now let's go and play around with how we can sort of add some effects, or not effects, but treatments over top like a testimonial. And again, I'll leave a lot of like the building of these to you guys to match your own visual preferences and also what works well with your brand. I'm just going to show you how to get it all set up. But again, we're going to have a bunch of different options available in our design system. So let's then go and maybe just swap out the image here, make it a little bit different. Maybe we want to go with like a working background. Yeah, I think that's actually a good one. And maybe we'll offer some differentiation as well. We're just going to swap this out real quick for someone else. There we go. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe just add in a heading here. It's maybe just you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. There we go. Sorry, you're going to be watching me design in real time right now, so hopefully it's not too boring and I don't mess up along the way. So maybe we set this to something like an H5 medium, something like that. I think that's fine. And let's bring down some more text, set this to our body large. Regular, change this to our body, and then Wayne Gretzky, something like that. And let's set this in a frame and set these both to hug and then hug. There we go. So what we're going to do then is copy that and paste it over top. And I think that might be a little bit small. So maybe we can actually up the size of this a little bit. Maybe we'll go with an H4 medium. There we go. And because it's on a black background already, we're going to want to set this to our on color. So our on color heading and our on color body. There we go. And personally, I think it's kind of like a little boring just to have text. So maybe what we want to do is add just like a 24 by 24. And we can add a subtle fill, but an opacity. So if we go into where we set up our gradients, again, I'm going to be filming a video on how to set up the gradients a little bit later on. We can sort of add sort of that background effect. You can also blur it if you want to. I don't think that's that half bad already. Maybe we just up the padding a little bit, make it a little more noticeable to 36 by 36. And maybe we add in some stars as well. Okay. So again, just showing you how to set this up and make you the best designer as possible. We're not going to be perfecting these by any means right now, but again, they're still going to look pretty good in the end. What we can do then is we can set this to our surface default. And then what we can do is paste this in as such. 5-star, you miss 100% of the shot, so you don't take Wayne Gretzky. And then what we can do is we extend this out. Maybe we'll set this to an H3. We're going to play around here right now. No, I like it better with the H2. Again, fit your own, our H4. Again, do things that fit your own visual preferences. And what we're going to do is set this to left and right, and then at the bottom. So when you bring one of these out, it's going to scale really nicely, hopefully. So yeah, you can see how it scales pretty nicely as well. And again, you can use the same sort of idea to play around with a ton of different sort of text templates, right? Maybe if you have different images, if I go into our images here in the layer, sorry, I know my head's probably covering the images, and we swap this out for something like a 5, what you can do is also play around the different gradients, right? So if you have an overlay, it's on the right. Maybe you have like an overlay diamond where it sort of has like a little bit more of an effect to it. Having that opacity sort of gives almost like a sense of depth to this background as well. And maybe what you want to do is also just put some text at the top. You have the ability to do that and also have some text at the bottom. Okay. So this is where you can really be creative in terms of your own sign up and login pages and what it is that you want. And maybe let's do one more sort of similar treatment here. And maybe for this one, what we're going to do is I'm going to drop the opacity entirely and just swap out the image for another portrait. Let's go with a portrait. Let's look for a new gentleman here. I have one in mind. Yeah, there we go. I like this one. So let's put this in the center and then center this text and then put that text like that. So again, play around different treatments in order to what works for you. Now, one request I get all the time is doing one that fits for phones, right? Because having like phones and mock-ups on your sign up and login, it's all the rage right now. I see it all the time. So let's look at how we can do that next. Okay, so before we actually get into the MacBooks and iPhones, including those in these kinds of frames, let's actually build out a page first so I can show you what that looks like and how to set that up, because that's probably what you're most looking forward towards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in maybe just one of our sign up forms here. And I'm going to extract the logo out of it for now. And we're just going to hide the logo here, because what I want to have at the top is sort of like this header, right? The header that includes the logo. So I'm just going to make sure I set this to fixed just so it doesn't move around. And let's sort of extend that out. Maybe you want to set the horizontal padding to 32 and maybe at the top just 64. Or that's too large. Maybe we'll go 24 and then just 0 from the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is just copy this and just inverse it. But I'm going to add in just some text here at the bottom, sort of like terms and conditions. Set this to our body, our text body. You can also use a link here as well. You know, probably for best practices, I will actually use a link component. There we go. I am going to use a link component. Excuse me. We're going to hide the icon right and the icon left. And we're going to make it our medium size. We're going to change it to terms and conditions, and then privacy policy. Again, using a link just because it is best practice. Privacy policy, because it's going to take you somewhere. There we go. So let's just inverse this now. So it's 24 from, not 42, 24, and then 0 from the top. And let's group these and then just paste these inside. There we go. I don't think that's that bad. Okay, so now let's group these together. And again, I'll use Figma's AI in order to like rename the layers a little bit later on. Okay, so we have that all out of the way. And now let's go and pull in one of our images here. Okay, so anyone, it doesn't really matter. So what we're going to do now is group these inside of a master frame. We're going to set this to 0. And one thing we're going to do is set each of these. So this needs to be set to fill. There we go. And one thing I want to do as well is I'm actually going to add an auto layout frame over top of our form, set it to fill, again, because we always want our footer to be at the bottom, and just make sure that the alignment is in the center, okay? And that's going to keep things at the top and bottom for our header and footer at least. Okay, so I'm noticing a small UI bug here. Let's go back and fix it, where this is not extended all the way to the top. There we go. That's my apologies. Probably on the other ones as well, so you can go back and fix those. So now what we're going to do is simply set both of these to fill, and that's going to make them so that they're both equal. And this is where you can play around with like the width of things. We're going to set the width to 1440 and set the height to 1024 as it is right now. Okay. So what we can do then is we can go ahead and call this our registration. Our registration. We can create the component of this, and now we have that component that we can go around and play with, right? So we can add a different variance here, which we'll get to very shortly. And if we did this right, now I can see that it's responsive. So we have our header, we have our form, and we have our footer as well. And I think things are looking pretty good. So if I extend this out all the way to a 1920, that's what that looks like. And we can even set some constraints here as well, right? So if I maybe want this card to be a max of 1,000. Look what happens when we max of 1,000. Let's see if this changes. Nope, nothing changed. Let's try that one more time. Let's add a max width of 600. There we go. Sorry. So now you can see you can play around with different treatments in order to maintain the look what you're going for. Maybe you have a larger image that you want to highlight. You can set the max of this column to something like 600, or even if you want to keep the form a little bit more center. So if you want to set the image have a max of 600, that's where you can play around with a lot of these different treatments. Okay. So experiment as best you want with that. Let's set these back to 0 for now with no maxes. Now let's go and add in some of our mockups onto our side modules. Okay, so now let's go ahead and pull in some of, create some of those MacBook mockups. One thing I forgot to do as well is I forgot to add in a page fill. So this would be like our surface page. There we go. So now let's go ahead and just pull in one of these images. And sorry, I know my face is probably covering it right now, but what I'm doing is actually just deleting the image, but we still have our base frame. I'm then going to go into our devices and just pull in one of these MacBooks, and then go back into our sign up and login. And again, lots more page templates on the way. Be sure to subscribe for that, or they will be available in our design system. And just simply paste that inside, set the constraints to center, and then we can clip content. So this is where you can kind of like play around with all these different options here. Maybe depending on what side it's coming from, you might have one on the left, one on the right. So again, if your form is on the left or the form is on the right, maybe you want to use this one here. If your form is on the left, maybe you want to use it vice versa. So you can play around with a bunch of different options. And maybe you also want to go into look for your iPhone and pull that in, and really kind of just like do the same. So maybe you have you can extend it out quite a bit, scale this out quite a bit. There we go. Sorry, now I'm getting picky. Something like that I think is kind of cool. And then what we can do is do this exact same on the other side, okay, depending on what side your form is. Okay, so that's how you can play around with like your mockups in order to create real life, realistic things. There we go. So I think we're in a pretty good state. Now let's go ahead and look at some different like types of registration pages and like building out some of those appearances. Okay, so when it comes to delivery of like these pages, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. Okay, well, only really two. Is an option that I see taken all the time, and no, I don't want to copy that to Figma slides, is like you can detach a lot of these elements and have it like sign up form right. Okay, and what that allows you to do then is sort of have like a side-by-side comparison. So I want to set this to like a mobile size. What's a good mobile size? If I go into my frames, a phone size, let's go 440. Okay, we'll roll with that. So if I then just condense this to a 440 440, maybe I can delete the image and sort of have like the page and the like the mobile next to it. Okay, if you only want to lock in on one of these versions for your application. But there's another approach that you can do is like have everything within the variance itself. So it doesn't really matter which one that you take. The variance is nice if like you kind of just want to play around with lots of look and feels that go into your application, lots of different like look and feels of sign up. At least like what I mean by that is like maybe with this one on this right border, the border radius, we maybe want set to 32, and then also the bottom radius to 32. If I just clip content on, you'll see what I mean. Sort of like it curves like those corners very slightly. You can play around with all these different types of variants now. So if I introduce this page, maybe I can swap to variant 2 to get that corner edge that I'm looking for. Or even if I want to go one step farther, right? Like I can delete this image entirely, set this, if I remove that max that I'd set a little bit earlier on, and then I can have another variant, which is just that image itself. And it still allows us to have really similar to what we did here, where you sort of have the pages side by side. Let me extend this out. Is what you can do then is like extend these out and then have different variants for your type. Okay, so if we sort of have size, we might have a desktop, and then a mobile size, where if we just delete the images, if we just set these to all like 440, there we go, and just delete the images. Still on the component here, we can swap between mobile and desktop relatively easily. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what element you set, what approach that you take. I might like swap between both of them in the context of our design system. Sometimes I might have pages here, but things like dashboards, which are a little bit more complex and don't always serve the same use case, I might take this approach. Okay, so TBD on that. But again, you can play around with all these different options. If I want to bring in the MacBook, like a MacBook, let's maybe go with a MacBook, right? There we go. We can see how it comes together now. Now, one thing as well that I would like to call out is for this MacBook, unless the background fill of this is something like a surface, let's go with like a default subtle. Unless the background of this is a different color, having it all white, it kind of looks a little bit weird when you have the header sort of standing out like that. So what we can do is we can paste in a header and then use our auto layout and adjust some things. This is where things are going to get a little bit funky. So I'm going to take this and also paste it down below. And now we can group these back together and then move the header above the footer, right? So to give the header and footer like that more of a full page than anything else. Okay, so you can use your auto layout and to play around with all these different appearances, and also with light mode, dark mode as well. Again, if you set your variables up right, you can sort of see what that would look like. And maybe I'd mess something up here. Yeah, I didn't have a variable applied. So set that to the surface primary. There we go. So you can sort of play around with light mode, dark mode for all these different versions and all these different variants as well. So again, like the full designs for these will be available in our design system, but hopefully you have a pretty good idea as to how you can build a sign up and login that works for your brand, is nice and scalable, and that will wow the rest of your team. Now, before I wrap up the video, I just want to show you how many different variations everything we've just done can recreate, right? So as I'm going through and prepping sort of the files for the design system, you can see already how many different versions are available, whether it's like with phones right, phones left, full page forms, images left, images right. And again, all you have to do is, if you want to swap it out from a sign up to a login, is really just simply swap out the form from a sign up to a login, and automatically it already does the work for you. Okay, so again, with just a little bit of work, look at how many different combinations are already available for selection for your own design system or for your team. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to watch part 1, click right there. If you want to watch another video I recommend, click right there. I'll put a link for our design system down below. See you at the next one.